Hello. Welcome to another episode of Season 16 of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, the theme is B movies for C students. We're taking a break from the current trends toward elevated horror and examining the history of horror B movies and how they've developed over time. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. So we're just cruising along through season 16.
It feels like just yesterday we started it.
Yeah. Feel like I'm just pulling my car into another drive-in movie. But we'll get back to that. So this season, the theme has been B movies for C students. The general idea is that we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of horror B movies. And then we're going to watch two of them from each decade, from the 1930s till the 2020s. And pay attention to how they change over time and sort of the larger context that they were made in and what they did well and what they did poorly and how they came to be made in the first place and all that. So each week we've kind of been giving a little bit of like the historical development. And I feel like the last couple of weeks we've kind of been focused on certain people who have been influential. So we had Ed Wood with Plan 9 from Outer Space. Then we had Robert Lippert, who just straight up stole all the advertising from one movie to make his own B movie with Rocket Ship XM. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting to see kind of these different figures and the way that the world of movies has changed around them. And so for this week, we're doing a movie called Blood Feast from 1963. And I wanted to answer the question, how does a movie made on a budget of less than $25,000 in 1963 make $4 million? This is not some big like Hollywood movie that has like, you know, all of the best and brightest advertising agencies in the country working on it. Right. This is a B movie about a serial killer who's trying to bring an ancient Egyptian death goddess into the world. Like, that's such a silly premise. Like, there's nothing about this movie on paper that makes me think that should have made however many times its budget that is. Like, it's crazy.
You think it's fake news?
I don't think it is, because I did some investigating.
Oh.
What I found is that basically what we've got here is a tale of not one influential man in the B horror movie genre, but two.
But three.
Actually, there might have been a third. But I think his name, the third name, was generally trends in away from movie theaters and towards drive-in theaters. But we'll get into that. Okay. So the two men were David F. Friedman, who was a producer and a promoter, and then Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was a director and cinematographer. And he has been called the godfather of gore, but apparently other people have been called that too. But I think Herschel probably has the best claim to it, because this movie has been called the first splatter horror film. So, according to Wikipedia, Lewis had seen Psycho and felt that the film had cheated by showing the results of the murders in the film, but not the action, because Hitchcock could not risk getting turned down by theaters. The main idea behind Blood Feast was that bathtubs of blood would be spilled in an effort to portray an Egyptian meal cooked with the bodies of virgins and the tongue of a woman being ripped out of her mouth. So there are two things here. One is he saw Psycho and then was like, hold my beer. Yeah. Come see my movie and you won't get cheated out of the gore. But the other thing is he really keyed on the idea that Hitchcock could not risk getting turned down by theaters. And so he felt like he had like limited himself in some way. Because at this point, Hollywood was deep into the Hays Code, which was sort of a self-enforced limit on what could be shown in movies. And I would imagine that most theaters, like traditional theaters, probably would abide by that as well, just to stay in their good graces.
Mm-hmm. I bet like that was actually maybe drama that was happening in the 60s, like what's allowed to be seen, what's not. Like now we have, I don't know, cancel culture maybe being a topic with, you know, some of the movie making things. I wonder if like, you know, theaters versus other options were like, oh, well, the movie industry is going to end. We can't put anything we want in theaters now that we got the Hays Code. I bet that happened.
Well, and we're not too far away from the time when all of the Hollywood production houses actually own the theaters.
Yes. Yeah.
And then that the government decided that was like monopolistic and they had to not do that anymore. And so another thing, though, that was kind of happening around the same time was that it was a time when drive-in theaters were becoming super popular with teenagers. So drive-in theaters had come into prominence well before this point, but they started off being very targeted towards families in the suburbs. But I guess over time, they got really popular with teenagers who would go there to bang and smoke reefer.
Yeah.
So by the early 60s, that's like your audience. And so this type of shocking, violent, sexy, attention-grabbing movie was really primed kind of for success in that market, because you're not trying to, like, it's a place that sort of feels like you're outside the rules a little bit, because it's not like you're in a theater where everybody else is going to get mad if you're making noise. Like, you're in your car in a field, or, you know, hanging out with your friends in a group of cars or something. And it just, this was kind of like almost a perfect film for that setup. Like if you had like a bunch of rowdy teenagers watching this movie on a big drive-in screen, that's pretty novel for the 60s, I think. And I feel like it would have done really well with that audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think that's up there with like with doing what was the last movie we did? The Rocket Ship XM? Is that the one where they did the questionnaire at the beginning with like teenagers to find out what they wanted in film?
Oh no, that was from The Raven.
The Raven. All right. So, yeah, it's almost like. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's almost like I feel like that's up there with like with The Raven when they did whatever the questionnaire at the beginning before they decided to write the film. Like, hey, what do you guys want to see in film? Like, I feel like that idea of getting this more so like, hey, we don't have to do theaters, we can do drive-in theaters. It's maybe changed the game a little bit. I'm sure they didn't think that at the time, but I feel like that idea is up there with it. So like what I'm saying is like in the 50s and 60s, which is 60s is when this film came out, like there was some pretty creative thinking coming about like, hey, what can we do to set ourselves aside or make ourselves different and still obviously try to succeed? Let's think outside the box. And I think that was definitely a good call, because you're absolutely right. Like, I really want to watch this film in a drive-in theater now. Like, it's just like, oh, that sounds dope. Like, think about it being like October, a little bit chilly.
Yeah.
In Oklahoma, a little bit chilly, not too chilly. And then watching that, oh, that'd be sick. You kidding me?
Yeah. Well, and that, it kind of reminds me too of the formula that we talked about last week, that the guy from the company that made The Raven had talked about, where, you know, you need it to be a little sexy, you need a little bit of danger, you need a little bit of murder, you know, and this movie definitely has all that, but just like kind of turned up to 11.
Better believe it.
So, but then, so I talked about Herschel Lewis. The other guy, the producer, was David Friedman. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of a marketing genius. He had started his career as a, and I quote, regional marketing man, because that was a job title, for Paramount. So, you know, one of the big Hollywood systems. Yeah. But then he thought he could make more money in independent distribution. So he started his own company. And by being independent from the Hollywood companies, he was also independent from the Hays Code. So he could basically make whatever movie he wanted as long as he didn't cross the line into doing anything illegal. And so he had, with the beginning of his company, he had worked with Lewis on several, we'll say, softcore projects.
Yep.
As producer. But Blood Feast was the first like horror movie, and then he got really creative with figuring out how to advertise it. So he came up with some publicity stunts for the film, such as giving theater goers vomit bags and then intentionally taking out an injunction against the film in Florida in order to gain publicity. So it was like he was like without a lot of budget, he was creating kind of this hype or this perception of this movie that was very much targeted at making it something teenagers wanted to rebel and go see. And so that obviously paid off really, really well because they ended up with $4 million to show for it off of a very small investment. So to answer the initial question, in 1963, the way you go from less than $25,000 to $4 million is to combine three key ingredients, which are a director with a vision, a movie marketed at teenagers and shown in a distribution channel they can get to, and a producer with low moral standards but high amounts of creativity in advertising.
Low moral standards is going to be the name of my autobiography.
Be a good,
Do you know how much $4 million was in 1963? It's worth
a good deal.
$41 million nowadays.
Well, how much was $25,000 worth?
Actually, about $50.
Man,
it's weird how math works.
They cashed in at the wrong time, but good on them. So,
I think I still like the idea of now, David Friedman, the marketing man. I think what he did was like kind of elevated the experience by doing the bags. But like I feel like when we were doing the 100 Years of Horror, we were talking about like the advertising marketing that these theaters were putting out, and basically like that's where like it came from a true story, this really happened kind of piece added to it. So I feel like that is a good idea, but David Friedman might have just considered himself a marketing genius, but what he did was just added on to what was already existing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
is that what all ideas are?
I think so, probably.
Holy shit.
I mean, I wouldn't know because this is the first podcast ever, but
that's true. Podcasts are.
One thing that stood out to me on this is it just like he had the foresight to see that he could make more money personally outside of the Hollywood system. Like he realized that the movie industry was pretty like buttoned up and regulated and hierarchical. And he's like, but what if I just didn't play by any of those rules? And so that. I think that vision of being able to see there is a market out there that isn't being met by, or at least isn't being monopolized by Hollywood, means that I can get in there and do something creative and make some money along the way.
It gives the option of marketing freedom or a freedom of ideas because you're not limited by all the rules, just some of the rules.
Yeah. And I think that teenagers will probably, and not just teenagers, a large segment of adults as well, but especially teenagers will always be a little bit intrigued by something that feels a little bit dangerous or like a little bit outside the normal or a little bit risky or a little bit like your parents would faint if they heard you went to that movie.
Right.
And so I feel like in this post-World War II boom where there were a lot of teenagers with access to money and also cars, that's when the stage was really just kind of set for this to be the perfect movie for the time. So that's all backstory and not about the movie itself or the plot. But I just thought it was really interesting because I read that the first time. And after having seen the movie, I was like, this does not add up for me. Like how did this movie, it wasn't like it was it wasn't like it didn't seem like it was made on less than $25,000. So how did it end up being so successful? And I think that's why.
I agree. I think this was probably one of the best decisions we ever made watching this movie.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
And I am excited to hear more about why you think that.
Well, I'm just saying it because I picked it out, but also maybe we should change when, our plan of when we, like, our ultimate goal is just be able to rent out a movie theater for freezies and watch horror movies. Like, that's the ultimate goal that we've talked about for 7 years now. What if we changed it to where we own a drive-in theater? We'll sell Dammy's Chihuahuas there.
Yeah.
Bring that business idea up to the business people and tell them to kiss our ass because we're going another direction.
Yeah, I'm
that
taking
only
notes. That only
means something to me and you.
Yeah, we'll do. So, but yeah. Anyway, we'll get more into the details of this one. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we will get into the what percentage of this movie's budget was spent on red paint type speculation. In 1963, box office spectaculars brought us Blood Feast, which would become known as the first horror movie in the splatter film subgenre. Blood Feast tells the story of a serial killer working as a caterer who is actually a member of an ancient Egyptian cult dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, who can only be summoned into the world with blood. As it would happen, he gets hired to cater the dinner of a young woman who will make the perfect final sacrifice to complete that ritual. This movie was made on a budget of $24,500 and brought in over $4 million at the box office. It can currently be streamed for free with ads on Tubi. In the past, you've often commented that a movie we watched had porno acting without the payoff.
Yeah.
That was basically the only thing I could think the whole time we were watching this. This is the quintessential example of that.
I call those films all hat and no cattle. I know exactly what you mean, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's also kind of what we signed up for with the season, but it was a little thick in this one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we talked a lot in the kickoff episode that I feel like, B horror movies have kind of a bad reputation for being very lowbrow and focused on like the gore and the shock factor more so than the storytelling or the creativity of the filmmaking and so on and so forth. And I can't say that any of that would be wrong to think about this movie.
Right.
It kind of, just fits right into that stereotype.
I think there's something to be said about a film. Like, I think that, the budget was lower. I don't know what the budget average for films back then, but like, I'll always like the DIY parts of films. So like sometimes like, yeah, you're like, gosh, that gore doesn't, the blood doesn't look real or this doesn't look real. It's like, no, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't. But is this how I would have done it? Like, this is how I could see myself doing it if I made a film myself. Because we're thick with like, let's just do it ourselves. That's why I started doing my leather stuff, because it's like I could just make this back. I'm just very DIY, so I kind of appreciate that, and I felt like it definitely rolled in 20 years later with some of the films we got in the 80s too. But I'm just saying, if you're gonna have porn acting, have porn in it. I'm not happy about it. You could get one or the other.
It was very rough from an acting and writing perspective. I do think a lot of the visual effects were pulled off in kind of a campy, fun way. I guess when it came to like the gore and stuff, like it was just so over the top in some of the murders and some of the like cutting out the lady's tongue and stuff. Like, you were just like grossed out to the point that you're kind of giggling because like it looks ridiculous, but also it's just insane what's happening on the screen. Right. And it definitely fits a niche in horror. And the idea that this was like the first splatter horror film, I can only imagine that it would have blown the minds of 60s teenagers.
Well, I mean, especially after hearing what you were talking about before the intro, like obviously, or I feel like part of the extra, the reason why they call it splatter horror is almost like a FU to the mainstream movies that were out, or mainstream production companies, or even, you know, whoever invented the Hays Code, where it's like, hey, fuck you. We don't have to, like, just because it offends you doesn't mean it offends us. And because of that, and because this is independent, guess what? We're going to go over the top with it. I feel like that's the same case with Savini, the makeup artist. Mm-hmm. Some of the stuff he does, you know, where it's just like, fuck you. It's a movie, it's make believe. Let's go over the top with it. However, what I realized watching this film was this is a very similar concept to the movie The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. The Mummy cut out the tongue. The Mummy cut off this, just so he could bring back his love of his life.
And what was her name?
Tutankhamun.
I was hoping you'd say Ishtar, and I'd be like, "No, this movie is nothing like that." Yeah. It was. I don't know, and there were parts of this movie that were just so over the top ridiculous, like not in the horror way though. Mm-hmm. So like Pete and Suzette are going home, and he's like, on second thought, you might be safer with the killer than you are with me. That was an A+ pickup line, and it totally worked. That is amazing to me.
Yeah. She's just like, whoa, you're kind of cute.
Yeah.
You got a little bit of bad boy in you.
Exactly. And yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say, honestly, for most of this one. And go ahead.
I think considering like where we came from, some of the movies we watched, like Mask of Fu Manchu and stuff, like this makes sense as far as the content of what the movie was about. Like we're here for the outlandish, you know, season B movies for C students season. I feel like is part of, let's see how weird we can make it. And in this case, they made it very weird. However, like it still needs to be a complete package. And this one definitely was on the struggle bus. I think that they spent a little too much time on like, hey, screw it. Let's just put it in there, put that line in there. We'll make up for it with marketing.
Yeah, and there were definitely some things that I would say were like characteristic of kind of the old B movies that we watched, where, you know, it opens with that radio broadcast about the grisly murder, and then, you know, the police have made a request that all women stay home after dark. And then it did that thing that like every horror movie now does, where it had that quick opening scene that was kind of a standalone that set the tone, you know, where the guy comes in with a knife and stabs her in the eye and cuts her up and stuff, and it's super bloody. And it's just like, okay, they have established that this is going to be a horror movie and that there should be a level of concern, sort of, or like dread in the back of your mind as you watch what's about to happen, when it kind of resets in and starts developing the story more. But there were also some things that were just strange. Like the music in a lot of it really sounded to me more like super old timey organ music, like you'd have accompanying a silent film, than it did what I would expect for a horror movie in the 60s, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even like I noticed even the makeup on the villain, like with his eyebrows, like you could definitely see that they were painted on, and his hair like definitely had just baby powder in it at times to make it look gray, and like it almost looked like he had white paint on his face, like what you would have to do with like the black and white films to, I guess, show contrast or whatever they used to. Like there were things like that where it was like, maybe because of the budget, they had to get an old school like set designer or like you know, whatever makeup artist from like the silent era. like come out of retirement for it, and he's just like, I still got it, guys.
Yeah, right.
Don't worry. They're like, well, he's got to have gray hair and he's got to have these sharp eyebrows. He's like, that's fine. Couple packages of baby powder and give me some grease paint. We got this. And
he comes out and he's like, he goes to the drive-in and he's like, wait, that was in color?
Yeah, the whole time. I got my buddy out of retirement to do the music for it. He plays the best organ in town. But no, you're spot on with that though. Where there are definitely times with movies where we talk about it's like it has the whole package. It's like the music was perfect, the dialogue, it just fit. This one was definitely like, oh, you can put a little bit of effort into this. Just because it's a cheaper film doesn't mean you don't have to care about the dialogue or whatever. But then at the same time, it's like, how many times while the filming were they like, we're literally making a film about the resurrection of this thing by killing women and who read the same book. Like, how can we pull it off? And they're like, yeah, we got this.
Yeah. And I think that overall it followed a pretty clear-cut formula that we've already seen used just over the course of this season, where it's, you've got a killer, he's on the loose, he's going to strike more and more. It's a race from the police to try and, catch him and stop him before he kills more people, or like whatever timeline it is, like the event that's coming up that is the thing that's the deadline that spurs the action for the plot and everything. And so it definitely feels like it was seated kind of in the B movie, this is what we're trying to do thing. But what was crazy to me about it was that it had sort of the Hollywood happy ending at the end of all that.
Yeah. They really screwed the pooch on that one.
I did laugh though when they just left his body in the trash truck and walked off.
There's like, they just kind of pat their hands and they're like, hey, it's done.
Yeah.
Now let's go have a cigarette.
Yeah. But yeah, it was
so I like watching a TV show, Leave It to Beaver, from a long time ago. I don't know why, I just watch it. Theodore Cleaver is a terrible actor, but one thing I think that he was a kid. I shouldn't have said that. But when he acts, what he does is like he opens his mouth, I say like 30 seconds, maybe 15 before like he starts saying the next line. So like he's already trying to do it. Like the mouth is open, it's going there. It's almost like reading the other actor's lines. And I saw this so many times throughout this film. I legit was just like, oh, maybe that's how they thought acting was. But at the end, when they figure out what was going on and they go to chase the bad guy, like I saw it clearly happen with God, I think he was like a police detective or something. He was telling a couple guys to go do something, but like he pauses, he looks down, he opens his mouth, and then he does the line, and it's just like, oh, that's gnarly. Like, that's Theodore Cleaver for one. For two, could you just be like, all right, let's try it again, and don't open your mouth and try to think about what you're going to say before, just say it. Because there was also a cut in the middle of that scene as well. Like, it clearly cut part of it out, edited it. They could have just done it again. It just bothered me. I was just like, this is terrible. What are we doing here? Yet again, did we sign up for that for this season, though? And I think we did.
I agree. The one thing in this one that never felt like it was obvious in other movies that we watched was, I think there were several scenes where the actor or actress was quite clearly looking down to read their lines off of a piece of paper on the desk or couch next to them.
That may have been the case with this dude, because he definitely looked down in the middle of the line.
Are you talking about when he was at his desk, the police guy?
No.
Because that one, it was just like, there are literally papers on his desk. Like, I'm pretty sure I know what's
That's
happening.
all it was.
Here.
No, I think it was after that, but I only watched this one once through, so I could be a little shaky. I know it was towards the end.
Yeah.
But yeah. I didn't even think about that, though, being the, reading the lines while that was going on. I read that Marlon Brando used to do that, but he definitely pulled it off a little bit better, if so.
Yeah, he at least remembered to not act like that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
But hey, we can't all be professionals, But yeah, this movie was quite the experience. It definitely, I think, is like one extreme of what B movies could be, as we sort of got away from the previous eras when it was more closely tied to the Hollywood system. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that we did it, and it is definitely an interesting story just on how successful it was based on how bad we think the movie is. But it's just kind of a product of like the time and place and what people were able to do. And so I think it's worth discussing as we continue our journey through B movies for C students.
I think this movie would be the definition of polishing a turd. You know what I'm saying? The meat of it was not the greatest. I didn't mind watching it. I would definitely watch it in the drive-in theater too, just because I think that'd be dope.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, whew. But hey, one thing we can't say about this film is at least it wasn't in space this time. Jesus Christ, how many of those can we pick out?
I mean, I'm kind of enjoying the space movies, but okay.
I have no idea why I just attacked it, dude.
Message received. Not picking any more space movies because I don't want to get bullied.
Fuck's sake, how many fucking aliens can we fuck? I'm just kidding.
That's an awful lot of disappointment. What are you, my dad?
I know. I'm sorry, man. I'm just kidding, though. That's all I got.
Same. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening. Oh, shit.
Yeah. Guess who's editing this podcast? I don't know why that came to me. Did you hear me though? Like when I said that and then I paused and I go, oh shit. Like that was my realization. Like that's a fucked up thought, man.
Oh, we hear you're interested in blood and gore. May we recommend
the Vietnam War.
The Viet Cong.
Well, and I'll edit this out, but what I was thinking was like,